In the last video, we left off showing that pink view controller. That was it. This is the video where we're going to lay down the foundation for our navigation. But let me kind of explain how all this navigation works. Because we have a tab bar controller, as you see in the design. That tab bar controller is going to hold two navigation controllers, each one, one for the search tab, one for the favorites tab. And in those navigation controllers, we're going to hold view controllers. So it's like containers holding containers, right? I like to use the Russian doll analogy, right? You pick up one, you open up a Russian doll, there's another one in there. You open that up, there's another one in there. That's kind of how this navigation works. So what we're going to do is we're going to build it out in code. I'm going to describe it as we go. And at the end, once we build it in Xcode, I'm going to blow out all the views so you can see exactly the tab bar controller holding the navigation controller, which is holding the view controllers, right? So hopefully this all makes sense if you're not familiar with how these containers of containers work. So the first thing we want to do, like I said, we want to get rid of this view controller here. I said this is the generic view controller. We're going to get rid of it. In its place, we're going to put a UITabBarController. And again, we're going to come back and change this. This is just a placeholder now. So when I delete this view controller, Xcode doesn't, yell at me. So in order to start building this foundation, we actually kind of have to start backwards, right? Because like I said, this tab bar controller is going to hold our navigation controllers. The navigation controllers are going to hold the view controllers, right? And the view controllers I mean is this initial search screen that you see here, right? In the navigation controller, you push on to the collection view of the followers, etc. So if I ran this right now, nothing would show because the tab bar controller doesn't have anything in it. So in order to build this, we kind of have to work backwards. I have to build the initial view controllers so I can build the navigation controllers, right? Because they go in there. So then now I can build the tab bar controller. This will all make sense in a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is create that search view controller that you see here. That's what this is going to be. We're not going to build out that screen yet. And then the other view controller is going to be the favorites list view controller, again, that you see here. Again, we're not building out the screen. We're just getting the placeholder there. So let's start there. And then, like I said, we're going to build the navigation controller, then the tab bar controller, and put it all together. Okay, so in your project, and get a followers file, do Command N. That'll bring up a new file. We're going to do Cocoa Touch class, hit next. And yes, you do want it to be a subclass of UI View Controller. And we're going to name this Search VC. And some people type out View Controller. I just find that to be redundant and cumbersome. I like less clutter. I just do VC, name it whatever you like. So I'm going to call that Search VC. Make sure it's a Swift language. Hit next and save it to where you need to save it. Cool. And while we're here, we're going to get rid of the comments. And like we did before with the test, we want to make sure we're showing the right view controller. So we're going to give it a color. So view.background color equals .system pink. That'll give us that color. And then we'll make the favorites one blue so we can see it in the tab bar controller, blue and pink back and forth. Okay, so now the same thing. Make sure you have the GitHub followers folder selected. Command N, Cocoa Touch class. Now we're creating our favorites, and I like to call it favorite list VC because it is a list of the favorites. So favorite list VC. Again, make sure it's the UI view controller. Make sure it's in Swift. Hit next. Save it. Same thing we just did. Delete the comments for cleanliness, and make this one blue. View.background color equals .system. And by the way, I don't want to hover over this. So this whole dark mode implementation that we're going to be doing it as we go. It's not like we're not going to do anything and then at the end, we're just going to convert everything to dark mode. We're going to be building dark mode in as we go. So the reason I use system blue and not blue is because these system blues and system pink, those are colors that automatically adapt. It's like a slightly different shade of blue, whether it's dark mode or light mode, to make sure it looks really good, right? This is like the default Apple stuff. And Apple really has that attention to detail. So you're not getting the same blue in dark mode and light mode. The system will actually adapt it. So that's why we're using the system colors. And I'm going to show you more about that in a little bit. So now that we have our view controllers created, right, our search VC and list VC, now, and this is what we're going to put into our navigation controller, right? Because a navigation controller just can't show by itself. A navigation controller has to be holding an array of view controllers. Right now, our array is only going to hold one view controller, but that can change. So back to our scene delegate here. Now let's create the two navigation controllers because, like I said, the tab bar is going to have a search tab and a favorites tab. And each one of those tabs is going to house its own navigation controller. And then, like I said, those navigation controllers are going to house their array of view controllers. So to create that, and by the way, we're going to refactor all this at the end. I'm going to kind of write some spaghetti code to explain it, and then we're going to refactor. It's going to look nice and pretty and good code. So let's do let search NC, short for nav controller, equal UI navigation controller. We get the autocomplete, initialize it. We want to initialize it with a root view controller. Remember I said a navigation controller has to have something to show. So that root view controller, because it's a search NC, is going to be an instance of a search VC. And again, we're going to refactor this now. This is kind of placeholder stuff. And let's do the same thing for the favorites list. So let favorites NC equals UI navigation controller, again with a root view controller, and this is going to be a favorites list VC. So same thing. So again, we're just creating the navigation controller that holds those. So now we want to put these navigation controllers inside the UITabBarController. So again, I told you this is going to be messy for a little bit. It'll all come together. So let's actually do this here. Let tab bar equal UITabBarController and then we're going to replace this and call this tab bar now that we created up here on line 23, because we want to customize this a little bit. We want to do tab bar dot view controllers equals, and it's an array of view controllers. So make our array here real quick. And this is going to be search NC, and then also favorites, favorite list NC, I'm sorry. Favorites NC is what I called it. Man, too many similar names. So there we go. So we have our search NC on line 20, and then favorites NC on line 21. Okay, so now we have the foundation. Like I said, our tab bar controller is holding the navigation controllers, which are holding the view controllers. So when we run this, we should see a pink and a blue screen as we tab back and forth. So let's run it and see what we got. So as you can see, we have our system pink. This is our search VC. It shows up first because that's what we put into the array first. You see it's a navigation controller because it's got the nav bar, and you see our tab bar at the bottom, but wait a minute, there's no icons. But wait, if I click, so the functionality is there. There's just no like icons or titles there to let me know what I'm clicking on. Fun little mystery game though. Like, ooh, how many tabs are there? But let's go back and fix that. And this is part of the kind of like the refactoring as well. But our general foundation is working. Again, tab bar controller, holding navigation controllers, which are holding view controllers. So now that we need to do some customization on these objects to get the titles and the icons and all that stuff, now we're going to start our refactor. So we know we're going to have to kind of create our view controllers here. So I actually like to separate this out. We'll scroll up here into a function here. So func create search navigation controller. And this is going to return a UI navigation controller here. So, and we're going to return this navigation controller with the search VC in it. Oops, I forgot the old parentheses there. So let's go ahead and let search VC equals initialize a brand new search view controller. And this is going to replace what's up here, up at the top, but we're doing it down here now. So in the view controllers is actually where you configure the tab bar like title and icon. So search vc.title equals search. And this is also like the title that goes at the top of the nav bar. And search vc.tab bar item. Again, now we're configuring the tab bar item at the bottom, and it's going to be a UI tab bar item. If you initialize that, you can see we have a couple options here. We're going to use the system item. So down here, these last two, title, string, image, selected image. If you were creating your own custom tab bar with, again, with the custom images, maybe you got some cool tab bar icons, this is where you would initialize that with. We're going to use the system stuff because, again, we're using a search icon and a favorites icon, and Apple has those by default, so that's what we're going to use. So .system item, and if you hit the dot right here, you can see bookmarks, contacts, downloads, favorites. You know, this is all the most common types of icons. So we're going to use search, and the tag is going to be 0. So that's going to be the first one, right? It's 0 index. It's going to be the one on the left. And then we want to return, right? Because we're returning this UI navigation controller here on line 33. So return, we'll initialize the UI navigation controller. And again, with the root view controller, this time we're using the root view controller number 34, or on line 34 here, just called search VC. Again, that we configured with a title and a tab bar item. So fill this out with search VC that we created right there. Now we're going to do the same thing for the favorites navigation controller here. So again, I like 2 spaces in between. You're going to get some style stuff too throughout this video. I like 2 spaces vertically in between my functions. On this huge screen where I got to have my text very big for you, it may seem excessive, but in normal text size, I like it. It's better. So func create, and this is going to seem repetitive, but we're going to talk about that. Create favorites Navigation Controller. Again, this is going to return a UI Navigation Controller. Like I said, this is going to seem like very similar code, and I do this intentionally. So let favorites VC or list VC to be consistent equals, and again, we're initializing a favorites list VC. We're going to configure it very similarly. Favorites list VC dot title equals favorites, and favorites list VC dot, again, is the tab bar item equals UI tab bar item. Initialize that with the system item. This time, if you hit dot, there's going to be a favorites. Pretty convenient. And then this time the tag is going to be 1 because this is the one. And if you had like 4 more of these, it would go like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then again, return UI Navigation Controller, root view controller is favorites list VC, the local one. Real quick, let me actually do that real quick. Let me redo that because oftentimes you'll see like variable names very similar to the class name. I don't know if people pick up on this, but when you do the autocomplete and you fill in the view controller and you start typing favorites, you can see one has an L next to it and one has a C next to it. This L means it's the local variable. The C means it's like the class, and you can see it's capitalized here, whereas this one's lowercase. So that's how I always know which is which. You can see like the local variable or the class one. Local meaning it's local in the scope. It's this one we created on line 43. So we want to use the local one. Just a little tidbit there. Maybe you didn't know that. So back to like these two functions are very similar, right? Except, so you could write a function that took in like 5 parameters, right? We would need to know the type of view controller that got sent in. We would need to pass in the title. We would need to pass in the type of system item. We would need to pass in the tag. And when it comes to that, like if I have to create a function that takes 5 parameters, I would much rather just, keep it simple and write a very similar function. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this is where like the art of programming comes in. Like if you just blindly follow the don't repeat yourself rule or make everything crazy, flexible and reusable, you can take that too far and your code can become more convoluted than it has to be. So again, there's no black and white, right or wrong answer. It's just, it's very nuanced and also probably very subjective and opinionated. Like some people may prefer passing in 4 or 5 parameters. I personally don't like that. I think it becomes more confusing. Okay, so we have our search controllers kind of refactored. So let's delete these 2 up here. We no longer need those. Now we just need to kind of refactor out this tab bar initialization. So let's do that as well down here. Slide up here. So func create tab bar, and then we're just going to pass in this function to the root view controller of the window. So this is going to return a UITabBarController. And then let's go ahead and yank this code out because this is what we're going to kind of use up here. So delete that code, bring it back down here, paste it. So we do want a tab bar to be that, and then we're going to start configuring this tab bar. Before we throw in the view controllers, we want to configure this with the tint color. Because we want, if you saw in the design, or it's actually not on the design, but in the video, we want the tint of our tab bar to be green just to kind of go with the overall style. And if you do it here and use the tab bar appearance, it's going to make it like app wide. So let's do UI tab bar dot appearance. Again, so appearance is like overall appearance. We're going to do this again with like navigation controller too. Dot tint color, and that's going to equal dot system green. So there you go. And now we just need to initialize this tab bar with our view controllers, except now we don't have those variables of search NC and favorites NC. So this is where we're going to call these functions that we created here, and they're going to create those. So now we're going to do create search navigation controller and create favorites navigation controller. And you could probably let's actually do this just because these long names, like I try to not do those when I need to. So again, create search NC. If we're going to use NC and VC, let's be consistent for abbreviations. So create search NC, create favorites NC, and let's just, because these are very long names, unnecessarily long. Sometimes a long name is fine because it's very descriptive, and shortening it would make it confusing. That's not the case here. So now the last thing we want is to return that UITabBarController. So return tab bar. And then now, so here again, we have the function that creates our navigation controllers. We're using those functions to create our tab bar. And then now up here, instead of just passing in tab bar, now we can do just create tab bar, and it will run all those other functions. So Again, we've refactored that out of this will connect a scene because, again, this is a very important, this may be a bad analogy. It's almost like the view did load of like your whole app, right? So I like to keep this clean and not super cluttered. That's why I moved all this code out of there into its own functions. So now when we run it, we should see the tab bar with the icons and the titles, and it should be looking good. Okay, so here's our search screen, the system pink. You can see the tab bar is there with the search and the green tint. We tap on favorites. Now that gets the green tint and blue. So there we have it. Our foundation of the navigation is all set up. And again, I know I've said this before, but I want to repeat it. It's the Russian doll analogy, right? Where you have the tab bar controller that holds two navigation controllers. For example, when I click on search, I'm looking at the search navigation controller. When I click on favorites, I'm looking at the favorites navigation controller. They're two separate things. And a navigation controller is essentially, I look at it like a deck of cards. Like if you imagine a stack of deck of cards, but each card is a view controller. So whenever you push a new view onto the stack, view controller onto the stack, you're basically putting a new card on top of the deck of cards. And that's the one you see, whatever's on top. And then when you go back, you're popping off that view controller, or that top card of the deck of cards to reveal the view controller underneath it. That's what's happening when you're going back and you're pushing new views on. And so like a view controller can only have a navigation controller may only have two view controllers in it, or it could have 20, right? So that's the stack. And that's also, if you understood what I just said, how you're just like popping and pushing on top of a stack, like that is like the data structure, a stack, kind of in a nutshell. But that's how navigation controllers work. So you kind of see that Russian doll analogy where it's just containers holding containers. So hopefully that cleared up a bit. What I did say I was going to do is I was going to blow it up so you could really see it. I almost forgot to do this. The coolest part of the video, almost forgot to do it. So down here in Xcode, there's this debugger here, this view debugger, where it will pull up your app while it's running. It has to be running to do this. And if you see this, it doesn't look like much. But if you grab it and spin it, like, wow, now your views are popping out. And there's this little slider down here that can like pop out the views more in the lower left. And you can hit this plus button to zoom in, zoom out. Let me get rid of this bottom part so it's kind of, I can zoom in a little bit to show you. But here you can see in the upper left, you see you have our scene back here. You have the UITabBarController, which is holding the UINavigationController. And this is the favorites navigation controller. And then it is holding the favorites list VC. So again, tab bar controller holds navigation controller, which holds the view controllers. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can kind of see that. This view is also great for debugging. You know, if you're building a screen and you can't figure out like what's going on with the view, oftentimes it's behind another view. So again, this debugger tool is very, very useful for debugging complex UIs, but it also illustrates very nicely how these views are nested within each other. So hope that all made sense. On to the next video.